In this video, I want to talk about design innovation and the environment. I don't have magical solutions to the sustainability challenge, and I don't have fingers to point at anybody. So we will just start a conversation about design innovation and values. But first, let me tell you a story. A few years ago, I was in a classroom around the topic of managing value creation. As part of that, the question of stakeholders and how to define them was central to the discussion. As an exercise, the facilitator gave us the hypothetical situation of building a new monument on campus, which we had to identify the stakeholders for. We, in the classroom, started shouting out different stakeholders, including the students, the faculty, the funders, the visitors, the construction workers, the engineers, the designing architect, etc. The facilitator was still looking for one more particular answer she had in mind. I raised my hand and said, "The birds." People in the room started laughing. Obviously, that was not the sought-after answer, nor was it a rational answer in a room filled with corporate practitioners. The facilitator finally stated, "The fire department." The fire department is an important stakeholder that many tend to forget in the early design stages. While I agree that the fire department and other emergency services deserve a more central seat on the stakeholders table, I also wanted the birds to have an important seat as well. Unfortunately, that did not exist in the human-centered design thinking paradigm that many people understand and practice today. This is even though the existence and the thrival of the birds are tightly tied to that of our own as human beings. Let us for a moment imagine things are different. What would happen if, when we are thinking of new innovations, what if at that point the birds had a central seat at the stakeholders table? We'll come back to this question later. At this point, though, let us talk more about the human-centered thinking and ask the question, did the idea of human-centered innovation go extreme? The concept of human-centered design brought about tremendous benefits to us in developing better products and services. However, does it mean that human convenience is more important than that of other life forms? When the Industrial Revolution kicked off, many of that period made a mistaken assumption that natural resources were unlimited. There was also the assumption that nature's ability to digest our trash was also unlimited. Arguably, the Industrial Revolution brought about a sort of perceived human independence from nature and formed a tiny seed of a human-centered world. However, at this point in time, we have a solid understanding that natural resources are actually limited. With this, it might be a good time to question the way we have previously thought about design and innovation. This is not to point fingers at the past, but rather to build a better future. With this, maybe it's time to question our human-centered paradigm. We came a long way since the Industrial Revolution in realizing that natural resources are limited. We also came to understand that we share a finite planet with other life forms that arguably have existed before us. More importantly, we realized that as human species, we cannot exist on our own. With this expansion of understanding, we might want to consider expanding our design and innovation thinking to match this new understanding. We have always defined good design innovation as bringing off innovations that are humanly desirable, technically feasible, and businessly viable. For too long, we have defined good innovations based on what is good for us, human-centered. However, that might have pushed us towards an ecocentric obsession with our own well-being, neglecting that of the system that hosts us. Over the past decade, there has been a growing trend of organizations looking to minimize their negative environmental footprint, which is great. Minimizing is a good start, but the time will soon come when that is no longer enough. After all, minimizing damage is still damage. And putting forward the minimization question means that damage, in principle, is acceptable. Let's go back to our initial question. What would happen if the birds had a central seat at the stakeholders table? If that happens, minimizing damage will no longer be acceptable. Instead of asking how much damage we are causing, the more acceptable alternative would be asking how much life we are promoting. Let's go back to our definition of good design innovation and try to put life in it. With this, a good design innovation would have to answer the following question. Is it viable from a business perspective? Is it desirable from a human perspective? Is it feasible from a technological perspective? Is it life promoting from an environmental perspective? With this type of evaluative questions, we can hope to have the birds' agreement and blessings on our innovations. Just one more note before I conclude this video. I wanted to highlight that we don't have all the answers to address the environmental sustainability challenge. So part of what we are doing here is to question our current conventions and practices. This questioning aims to open up and keep up the conversation about the topic. More conversations can drive real change and positive innovation. Back to you now. How do you see this playing out? Are we as designers and innovators doing our part to address the sustainability challenge? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the field, so do share them with us in the comments below.